The two commonly most misunderstood and ignored verses in Scripture are Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9. Revelation 2:9 reads, I know your works and your pressure and your poverty, yet you are rich, and the blasphemy of those who say that they are Yahudim and are not, but are a congregation of Satan. 3:9 reads, See, I'm giving up those of the congregation of Satan who say that they are Yahudim and are not, but lie. See, I'm making them come and worship before your feet and to know that I have loved you. Ashkenazi Jews make up the bulk of the world's modern Jewish population at an estimated 75%. Today, for the majority of people who identify as being Jewish or having Jewish ancestry, their connection to Palestine extends back no further than 70 years ago with the founding of the Jewish state. Their assumed ancient connection to the land and lineage from the Israelites is an adopted belief, most of them being descendants of relatively late converts to Judaism extending back several generations, if not recent converts themselves. Their genetic connection to the Levant is according to its ancient definition and not the modern. It is via Turkey, not Palestine. The vast majority of Jews are genetically European, with the few who do have Semitic DNA acquiring it through intermixing with Sephardic, Arab, and Persian populations. The most common haplogroup among Jewish men is the J haplogroup. The J haplogroup originated in the Caucasus, the country of Georgia being the current site of the most ancient genetic sample. The Caucasus was the cradle of the Khazars, a nation of proselyte Jews who adopted Judaism around the middle of the 8th century. This haplogroup was spread through Indo-European invasions and migrations of such peoples as the Scythians and other groups. Nearly 40% of all men who identify as being Jewish belong to the J haplogroup. The subclade J1P58 has been accepted as being the only truly Jewish marker. However, J1P58 is not exclusive to those who identify as Jews, and only 20% of Jews belong to this subclade of the J haplogroup. Among those that claim to be Kohanim, roughly half belong to the J1P58 subclade. This is simply a fraud perpetuated by European converts. As I have mentioned before, the very name they have adopted for themselves, Jew, refers to people known as Western Ethiopians, according to Josephus. Hebrew is an Afro-Asiatic language, and the vast majority of people who speak Afro-Asiatic languages as their first language belong to the E haplogroup. In Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies, on page 383, he writes, we instinctively associate Semitic peoples with the Near East. However, Greenberg determined that Semitic languages really form only one of 6 or more branches of a much larger language family, Afro-Asiatic, all of whose other branches and other 222 surviving languages are confined to Africa. Even the Semitic subfamily itself is mainly African, 12 of its 19 surviving languages being confined to Ethiopia. This suggests that the Afro-Asiatic languages arose in Africa, and that only one branch of them spread to the Near East. Hence, it may have been Africa that gave birth to the languages spoken by the authors of the Old and New Testaments and the Quran, the moral pillars of Western civilization. The widespread belief among Christian Zionists that the Ashkenazi Jews descend from the ancient Israelites is a myth that carries with it huge historical, geopolitical, and spiritual implications.
What else? We're going to be getting into some of the top myths that are surrounded. I was telling you, I have a student of mine who's a good friend of mine. Hopefully he'll watch the show. And we've gotten into, this talk a few times. And usually because this is a human thing. You know, when you see children who are just being killed, right, and indiscriminately, and then people will make arguments like, look, we're the ones being terrorized. You know that we have to defend ourselves, right? This land, we came there, and now they're trying to force us into the ocean. So what do you say when you hear things like this?
Well, it's a complete distortion of the history and a complete distortion of reality. The only reason there is a Palestinian resistance is because the Palestinians were thrown out of their land, Palestine was occupied, and Palestinians live under a brutal regime, which is very similar to the apartheid regime that used to exist in South Africa. Therefore, there is resistance. If that didn't exist, if there was no occupation of Palestine, if Israel did not violently kill and oppress Palestinians, there would be no Palestinian resistance. So you can't blame the victim for resisting. You have to look at what started the conflict. You have to look at the oppressor. You have to look at the stronger power, and the responsibility lies in their hand.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, that's taking it into a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me. And even if it was true, I don't think it. I agree with him. It doesn't justify. I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there. And I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of, that's a lot of myth there.
Hello and welcome. Could the founding of Israel have been based on a total misunderstanding of history? One Israeli historian has created huge controversy with his findings that the idea of a single Jewish tribe is wrong, and that much of the justification for the founding of the Jewish state of Israel is actually political. When the nation of Israel came into existence in 1948, it was the culmination of centuries of dedication by Jewish nationalists to the idea that their people must return to a land from which they'd been exiled almost 2,000 years earlier. But many modern archaeologists and historians have begun to doubt whether or not this event really happened. Other discoveries are shedding new light on key past events of the Jewish people in the Holy Land and creating some uncomfortable dilemmas for those who live there now. So today we ask, do new perspectives on Israel's past require a new vision of its future? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we'll welcome your phone calls on the show as well. Joining me to discuss this from London, his theories and the controversy he's stirring, is Shlomo Sand, a professor of contemporary history at Tel Aviv University and author of the book The Invention of the Jewish People, which was on the bestseller list in Israel for several months and has recently been translated into English. Professor Sand also teaches at the University of California at Berkeley and the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. Professor Sand, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Sir, I have to start off with a quote from your book where you say, or giving the reason why you write it, you say, "I could not have gone on living in Israel without writing this book. I don't think books can change the world, but when the world begins to change, it searches for different books." Considering what you've written in this book, you can't be very popular among many Israelis right now, and I wonder what difference you think you're going to make putting these views forward. What difference will it make to the situation in Israel?
As I said, I am not sure that books can change the world. But, this conflict without ending, this conflict, I have a pessimist position. But I thought that it's very important to say something about myths that give birth of the Israeli state, and why this myth that helped to create Israel, this same myth can destroy Israel. You see, this ethnic myth. And this is a part of my book.
Well, Professor, you ask your readers to take a clear and unbiased look at Israel, to consider your views and the validity of your argument. And I wonder, considering the history and how loaded the history of Israel is, and how entrenched people are in their views of how important Israel is to them, how can they look so in an unbiased way? How can they step back from what they're so conditioned to think about?
You know, I don't know exactly, but I think that as a historian I have to put some truth in the narrative of the Israeli foundation. As I am writing in my book, it's very important to understand. You spoke before about the exile. You know, everybody in the street in Washington and London or in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv knows that the Jewish were expelled 2,000 years from Palestine or Judah, and they come back after 2,000 years. I think it was a myth, a legend. It's not a historical truth, and I try to prove it in my book. You see, it doesn't change the fact that Israel exists today, but all the justification, the historical justification of the Zionist colonization, I put on question in my book.
The question we've been trying to answer is a question that has been under debate for the past couple of decades, mainly between linguists. And that question is the origin of Yiddish language. Now, Yiddish is a language that consists of German, Hebrew, and Slavic elements, written with Aramaic letter, and it has been spoken since the 9th century. The prevailing view is that Yiddish is an old German dialect, where the alternative view is that Yiddish is a Slavic language that used to have Slavic words and grammar, but over time it shaded its Slavic lexicon and adopted German words, while retaining the Slavic grammar. In a sense, Yiddish speakers sounds like Yoda from the Star Wars universe. Yoda's language also consists of words in English, real and made-up one, like Wookiee and Jedi, but the grammar is off. Yiddish also consists of 251 words for just buy and sell, suggesting it was invented by traders. Language, geography, and genetics are all connected. The further I move away from England, the more dissimilar the DNA and languages of the people that I will encounter will become. So if we have a tool that converts genetics into geography or languages, we can find our answer. Fortunately, in 2014, we published the Geographic Population Structure, or GPS tool, that does exactly that. GPS converts DNA information into geography. So to answer the hypothesis of where Yiddish speakers came from, we applied GPS to the genome of Yiddish speakers to find where their DNA is from. Surprisingly, GPS took us to northeastern Turkey. At first we did not understand the result, but when we looked at some old books, we found 4 ancient villages named Ishkenaz, Eskenaz, Ashenaz, and Ashkuz, names that may be derived from the word Ashkenaz. This place resides on a hub of trade networks. This is where Silk Roads and other trade routes converge. We speculated at that time Iranian traders, Iranian Jewish traders plying the Silk Road, moving merchandise from east to west, from Asia to Europe, identified this region and made it their center. They converted the local population, and to maintain their monopoly on trade, they invented a secret language, one that only Jews can speak, while they remain conversant in all other languages. With their secret language, they could move all their merchandise back and forth and move information between East and West to maintain their monopoly. Shortly after they invented the language, they relocated. The young Ashkenazic Judaism was relocated to Khazaria, and some 500 years later, when Khazaria was destroyed, they moved to Eastern Europe. At that time, the network collapsed, and Ashkenazic Jews separated from their brethren of the Iranian Jews, and the two populations went their separate ways. Yiddish was stopped being used as a trade language, and was now start accumulating words in German while retaining the Slavic grammar. Our results are consistent with the Slavic hypothesis, suggesting that Yiddish has a Slavic origin, and that it has originated in ancient Ashkenaz that is located in northeastern Turkey. By applying GPS to the genome of Yiddish speakers, we were able to find ancient Ashkenaz and villages where the DNA of Yiddish speakers has originated probably over 1,500, 2,000 years ago. The search for ancient Ashkenaz has been going on for about maybe over 1,000 years, and now we believe we found it. Of course, this needs to be verified with archaeological evidence.
On pages 130 and 131 of Nathan Ashabel's Pictorial History of the Jewish People, he writes, "It is also significant that Tushkataish, the language of the Khazar Jews, a Turkish dialect, is still spoken in Poland, Hungary, and Lithuania by the Karaites, the Jewish sectarians whose homeland was originally in the Crimea. Even more significant is the fact that Tushkataish is still spoken by the few surviving Jewish Krimchaki of the Crimea."
You will die from my pen stroke like Death Note. If it's written form, we battle. Freestyle, I'll sun you off the top like solar panels. And I got more examples. And I got more examples. No matter how many menorah lamps you have, you'll never hold a candle to the levels of pressure I was born to handle. You know why? Because you don't have no souls or backbones. Bro, you don't even know your past, bro. Real Jews were Hebrews, black men who used to grow their afros. You guys are just a bunch of fucking random phony Polish assholes who forged your passports and don't have a land of your own, so you come over and they jack yours. But what is it all for? Is it drilling offshore? Is it the land, or do you want more? See, Arabs were peaceful, bro. You could come into my house. I invite you in, take the keys to my car, the garage door. I just want you to feel comfortable at home since you're used to occupying households that are not yours.
To this, it's controversial, but oh well. In Israel, the ruling faction are people who look white.
Yeah.
They are white Israel, or they're white Jews who are descendants actually from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go to Israel, you see a lot of black and brown people who are the Israeli and the Jews and the Hebrews that are indigenous to that Mediterranean region.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, African immigrants to Israel.
Ethiopians, et cetera, et cetera.
And then,
they get thrown under the bus, the Ethiopian Jews, they get thrown under the bus over there.
And then, of course, the Palestinians who are brown.
Right.
Yeah.
So once again, to what I said earlier, and it's unfortunate that we have to put it this way for people to understand and potentially see that there is and I've been open about it, a war going on a international level between white and black and brown. And it's based on what you pointed out, which is the desire for survival of whiteness.
Right.
The color of skin, the color of hair, and these ideas.
That's the basis of racism. A sister named Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, rest in peace, she wrote a book called The ISIS Papers, breaking that down.
She just passed.
She just passed. Then the basis of white supremacy, systematic racism, is the fear of genetic annihilation. It's the fear of being wiped out genetically. That's what the whole Holocaust was about. When you read the writings of Hitler, Hitler didn't care anything about nobody's religion. He said that in Mein Kampf. He said, I don't care about the Jews' religion. I just care that they're non-white over here. Jews weren't considered white.
The way they look, their physical traits will mess up whiteness.
Right. They were they wanted a pure white race, which doesn't exist, by the way. But they wanted a pure white race, an ideology of a pure white race. And the Jewish people were considered non-white at the time. And also we have to understand over here, Italian
there are Jewish people here who could still consider themselves non-white, and who black people will be like, no, you white, and they'll be like, well, like my mom used to say, I'm not white, I'm Jewish, but she was a red-headed Polish woman.
Yeah, and they play with that over here with like a lot of Hispanics are classified as white. That started after the 1960s. So a lot of people, the whiteness thing, they let it go, they bring it back for different groups. Italians weren't considered white until like the 1920s. Greeks weren't considered white till the 1940s. So they play around with these classifications and get a lot of people confused.
His name is Tariq Nasheed. Before I get you out of here today, I want to appreciate you for the conversation.
Yes, sir.
Classifying Egyptian immigrants as white while some of them are not.
I'm a black man, as you see. My complexion is as dark as most black Americans, and my features are African, and I don't understand why I'm classified as white.
Experts say that the white supremacists in the past did so to justify their claim that blacks were subhuman, and that's why they consider ancient Egyptians white.
But they have an axe to grind, they have a position to support. This position has nothing at all to do with science, it has to do with ideology and politics. The position is that of white supremacy. So that position would be inconsistent with the data of Egypt that invented civilization, that gave most of the systems in the civilized world to humanity. If those people were black, then white supremacy has nothing to stand on. It's baseless.
North Africa, Palestine, and parts of Arabia have been known since ancient times as the land of Ham, or Kemet. These Hamitic peoples have never been anything else but black until recent times. White supremacists who have sought control over Palestine have redefined what these Hamitic North Africans are, giving them honorary white status and revoking it whenever it seems useful, like when telling black people that their own people, other blacks, sold them into slavery. Of course, these same Hamitic blacks are defined as white by the U.S. Census Bureau, or in the problematic happenstance that a Somali police officer shoots an unarmed white woman. Then they like to overemphasize the honorary white's blackness. I've heard it said before, the essence of power is the ability to define someone else's reality and have them live according to it as if it were a definition of their own choosing. The children of Israel have always been compared to looking like the sons and daughters of Ham. Even the ancient Greek and Roman historians are recorded as having said this. Let me remind you that the term Jew is a contraction of the word Judean, and the Judeans were a nation of Western Ethiopians, according to Josephus. Even Tacitus was confused by the physical appearance of the children of Israel. He was recorded as having said that many of his time were under the impression that they were of Ethiopian origin. According to Zondervan's Pictorial Biblical Dictionary, under the definition of Ham, it reads, the youngest son of Noah, probably born about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. Using deductive logic, we can safely eliminate Ham and Japhet, who is the progenitor of the Europeans, from the list, concluding that the so-called Negroes descend from Shem, since he is the only one left. On page 227 of Nathan Ashubel's Pictorial History of the Jewish People, he writes, in 1600, the famous geographer Leo Africanus wrote, the Abyssinians claim that a numerous people of Jewish origin is found living on the shores of the Nile towards the west under a mighty king. Some of our newer geographers located an unknown mountainous region at the equator between the Congo and Abbasia, which they call the land of the Hebrews. Jews also live in an inaccessible place in the mountains in a northerly direction from the kingdom of Goame and south of the kingdom of Gorham. They are powerful and they are independent. If it wasn't for white supremacists redefining the terms Mediterranean and Middle Eastern as pseudonyms for white, then people would understand that the term olive skin means black or someone with nearly black skin pigment. There being only 2 types of olives, green and black. Green olives being olives in their unripened state, and black olives being ripe olives. The color of the ancient Israelites is a sensitive topic because in answering that question, you also answer the question of what the Messiah looked like. White supremacists know this, and that is why they seek to change the face of Egypt from black to white. Because if you can change the face of Egypt in people's minds, you can change the face of Israel. So let me leave you with these final thoughts. As it is written in the book of Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. Now, brothers, as to the times and the seasons, you do not need to be written to. For you yourselves know very well that the day of Yahuwah comes as a thief in the night. For when they say, peace and security, then suddenly destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. But you, brothers, are not in darkness, so that that day should overtake you as a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. So then, we should not sleep as others do, but we should watch and be sober. 2 Ezra, chapter 6, verses 7 through 8. I answered and said, what will be the dividing of times? Or when will be the end of the first age and the beginning of the age that follows? He said to me, from Abraham to Isaac, because from him were born Jacob and Esau. For Jacob's hand held Esau's heel from the beginning. Now Esau is the end of this age, and Jacob is the beginning of the age that follows. The beginning of a person is the hand, and the end of a person is the heel. Seek for nothing else, Ezra, between the heel and the hand. 2 Ezra, chapter 14, verses 10 through 17. The age has lost its youth, and the times begin to grow old. For the age is divided into 12 parts, and 9 of its parts have already passed, as well as half of the 10th part. So 2 of its parts remain, besides half of the 10th. Now therefore, set your house in order and reprove your people. Comfort the lowly among them, and instruct those who are wise. And now renounce the life that is corruptible, and put away from you mortal thoughts. Cast away from you the burdens of mankind, and divest yourselves now of your weak nature. Lay to one side the thoughts that are most grievous to you, and hurry to escape from these times. For evils worse than those that you have now seen happen shall take place hereafter. For the weaker the world becomes through old age, the more shall evils be increased upon the inhabitants. Truth shall go far away, and falsehood shall come near. For the eagle that you saw in the vision is already hurrying to come.
The United States remains deeply committed to helping facilitate a peace agreement that is acceptable to both sides. I intend to do everything in my power to help forge such an agreement. Without question, Jerusalem is one of the most sensitive issues in those talks. The United States would support a two-state solution if agreed to by both sides. In the meantime, I call on all parties to maintain the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites, including the Temple Mount, also known as Haram al-Sharif. Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul. With today's action, I reaffirm my administration's long-standing commitment to a future of peace and security for the region.